I've been astonished at the media reaction to Andrew Yang. I mean, they really are treating him like Bernie got treated by the media. They despise him. Establishment media hates Andrew Yang. And listen, I honestly think it's not just the establishment media, it's also, I think, establishment politicians. I really think the reason why is it's twofold. Number one, he's for universal basic income, which they view as egregious and unacceptable and on par with like Medicare for all, which they're obviously like, super duper against. And that sort of transformative change, they're resistant to. So I think that's one reason they hate him. And I think the other reason they hate him, very simply, he's an outsider. He made his way to politics not through the traditional route. And they only respect and support people who come up through the system, understand the hierarchy, get the pats on the heads and the approval from the higher-ups and the leadership, and you act as a good little servant to the establishment, and then you raise up through the ranks. Now, I have disagreements with Andrew Yang, of course, and, Crystal and I interviewed Andrew Yang, and there were times where we were very aggressive against him and asking him tough questions. But there's a difference between interviewing somebody or talking about somebody disagreeing, but being fair and policy-focused, and just being a total smug prick asshole making arguments that make no sense. And that's what happened on MSNBC. So here's Morning Joe. Look at this conversation they have about Yang.
Hey, Donnie, I just got to ask, we've got like the most important mayor's race in New York City probably in the last 50 years, maybe 100 years. I don't know. It's really important for a city that just keeps losing residents, keeps losing businesses. And I've seen polls, Andrew Yang's, I've seen him ahead in a lot of polls. I mean, you and I could do a better job running New York City than Andrew Yang. No offense, Andrew Yang. But this is a problem, isn't it? What's going on in that race?
I love this city, Joe, and New York is in my blood. And some of my friends were all so concerned. New York is at a tipping point right now. If New York goes too hard left, and the city is doomed. As you said, if taxes continue to rise and it is no longer a place that makes sense for business and businesses are losing, we lose. New York still has to be in certain ways a top-down city. A guy like Ray McGuire, who's a former Citigroup guy, African-American, moderate voice, would be a great voice for New York, and he's got a shot. But the Andrew Yangs of the world and some of the more extreme candidates is going to push New York in the wrong direction. We saw what happened with Amazon and AOC and her crowd when they got a hold of it. Killed Amazon coming to Long Island City, which would have invented a completely new city. That kind of thinking, that takes over New York and kind of pushes the Amazons or the potential Amazons away. We're in trouble. It is a real tipping point for New York.
Well, I'm not really talking about politics. New York is one of the most progressive cities in America. So if New York gets a progressive mayor, well, that's fine. It lines up with New York City. But you want that mayor to be competent. You want them to know what they're actually doing. This is like, I actually think it's the hardest political job in America. And to have a political neophyte who ran for president with some quirk. I mean, it's one thing running for president and putting some quirky ideas out there and getting some media attention. But man, when you're running New York City.
That was the most smug, elitist segment I've ever seen in my life. They're talking like they're sitting in an expensive restaurant with Thurston Howell III around them. They might as well be smoking a giant cigar and having a huge top hat on. So let's go through it. He said, Andrew Yang is ahead in the polls. You and I could do a better job running New York City. No, you can't. No, you can't. I don't trust your fucking judgment. Donnie Deutsch or Morning Joe. I don't trust your judgment. But notice, you're going to see the theme running through this entire clip. The theme is leave the governing to the elites. All you pesky outsiders, you just get in the way. You're not serious. You're not serious. He says, Donnie Deutsch says, if New York goes too hard left, the city is doomed. what does hard left mean exactly? I mean, I'd love for him to define it and give specifics as to what he's talking about. But I mean, the argument is probably, hey, if you give everybody healthcare, or you give everybody college, or you cut everybody a check, the city's doomed. Really? Because I think those things are wonderful. I think those things are fantastic. And I think we have a lot of empirical evidence when you look at the Scandinavian countries, for example, that these policies are great and they have amazing results. And by the way, what does he say? Morning Joe says, he put some quirky ideas out. Quirky. It's quirky to give people universal basic income. That's what he's referring to, by the way, because he was talking about when he ran for president. It's quirky to talk about universal basic income. It's weird. It's outside of the ordinary. Even though we have social security checks, and we've had them for a really long time. Somehow cutting a check to old people every month, everybody that's the way we do it, so it's okay. But the idea of doing social security for everybody in the middle of a pandemic and a huge recession or depression, oh, that's quirky, that's weird, that's crazy. And then he says, listen, the problem is it's no longer a place that makes sense for business, talking about New York City. That's absolute bullshit. New York City is one of the most famous cities in the world, if not the most famous city in the world. The idea that businesses are just gonna, hey, let me leave this gigantic market and potential for success. They're not going to do that. And beyond that point, I just interviewed Andrew Yang, and Andrew Yang said to me, he wants to see regulations increased on big business, but he wants to see basically the government get off the back of the small businesses. Because the small businesses are struggling to get by, and sometimes there's red tape that's burdensome. He said, listen, for the small businesses, I want to remove the red tape. Now, listen, you might not agree with that if you're watching this, but it doesn't matter. The point is, they're wrong in their characterization of Andrew Yang's views. Andrew Yang is not anti-business by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he has a pretty big libertarian streak, I would argue. More libertarian than myself, for example. And that applies to business. So they're just not even accurately characterizing his view. They have this straw man they've created of him, and they're arguing against the straw man. And then Donnie Deutsch is such an idiot. He says, we saw what happened with Amazon and AOC. He's bringing up what happened with Amazon and AOC as if it's a bad thing. No, it was a good thing, because what was going to happen is the government was going to give a tremendous amount of money, a welfare check to Amazon to set up shop in New York. Why? So let me get this straight, Donnie Deutsch. You're against socialism, but you're 100% for corporate socialism. You want to give a welfare check to Jeff Bezos for doing Dickie McGee's acts. Hey, thank you for showing up. Why don't you loot the treasury? Is that what you want to do? Clearly, that's what you want to do. The thing that AOC did is not just, oh, it's good from a progressive perspective. It's good from a conservative perspective. A libertarian will tell you, an actual libertarian like Ron Paul will tell you, I don't want the government cutting a welfare check to Amazon just to set up a business there. No state government and no federal government should set up some sort of welfare check to give Amazon in order for them to go somewhere. They should just go and open their business wherever they want to open their business, and they shouldn't have to be incentivized with taxpayer money. Listen, I'm a New York taxpayer. I don't want my money going towards that. I don't want my money going towards Amazon. I'd much rather have my money go towards healthcare and education. So, I mean, these guys, they're just idiots. And this gets to the main point. He said, well, I'm not talking about politics here. I'm talking about competency. See, that's the mindset. The mindset isn't, let me look at your ideology and evaluate it based on the ideas and the policies. And let me tell you what I disagree with, why I disagree with it, what I agree with. That's not the way he looks at it. The way he looks at it is almost like a royal family type thing. You know, almost like an aristocracy or a kleptocracy, where it's like the good righteous people have already risen to the top of society and have been deemed appropriate by the establishment. And you, sir, have come up in an outsider way, and that's not acceptable. So it's not about your politics, it's about your competency is the thing I have a problem with. How the fuck do you know how competent or incompetent he is when he hasn't held elected office yet? You just assume he's not competent. Why? Because the establishment doesn't like him. And you think that means, oh, he must not be good at the job. No, what that means is he's not a bullshitter. That's what that means. That means he's not a little sycophantic, ladder-climbing loser who's totally vapid and vacuous and empty and only cares about self-aggrandizement and narcissism. Like somebody like Mayor Pete, for example, just to give one example. This is the most smug elitist segment I've ever seen. They dislike him because he's an outsider. They dislike him because of stuff like UBI. They dislike him because they've caricatured him as far left. Talk to somebody who's actually on the far left. They'll tell you how far left Andrew Yang is. They're just a bunch of idiots. He's a cackling idiot. These guys are both morons. And they pontificate about politics every morning. And they don't even know what the fuck they're talking about. They don't even know what they're talking about. This is the smuggest, most elitist segment I've ever seen. And you wonder why people hate the media. You know, look at the poll. New York voters love Andrew Yang. I'm sure some of it has to do with policy, but a lot of it has to do with he just seems like a likable guy. You know who's deeply, deeply unlikable? These guys. These guys. They were born on third base and they thought they hit a triple. You know, Morning Joe thinks he's actually talented, which is why he's on TV. Absolutely absurd, ridiculous. The establishment and the elitists are the problem. And the outsiders are the answer. Now, it varies. You have to look at on the merits of each outsider, but the answer is certainly not this nonsense. You and I can do a better job running New York City. Why? Because we're thoroughbreds and we have the pedigree. Yes. Yes. God, I hate these guys. They're the worst.